Greetings and welcome to the Necrotic Arcanum. Journey into the grim and darkest corners of the old world. The Arcanum will be a collection of Warhammer The Old World Grimdark tutorials, covering painting techniques, kit bashing and conversion methods with some old world focused terrain builds. My hope for this channel is to bring a somber fantasy world to gruesome life. My first tutorial will focus on a single spirit host miniature and how to achieve this shadowy aesthetic using a dark underlayer which transitions into a brighter ethereal glow. This method can be used across your army, and I believe it looks striking when applied to select parts of a miniature, adding visual interest and creating focal points. Twisted and tortured men of the Empire now serve the malevolent Necrotic vampires as the Chained Ones, a horrifying spirit host called forth to battle by the Banshee's deafening wails. During the modelling stages, I have positioned various Nighthaunt miniatures together on a single 40 by 40mm base. Layers of cheesecloth have been draped over select parts of the spirits, adding some surface variation. To create the shackled appearance, I have introduced a mixture of jewellery chains to some of the miniatures. After priming the miniature black, I apply layers of Max Darth paint from Greenstuff World to all the undersides of the spirits. This step is important as it gives the impression that the spirits are traversing in and out of the shadows. The properties of this light-absorbing paint create a unique, chalky, deep black, which is perfect to the contrast of the brighter, more luminous colours I will add in later steps. From above, I now add a layer of Abaddon Black from Citadel, ready for the application of our triad colours. When doing this step, ensure you only apply a small amount to retain the previous Max Darth paint. If you do over apply, you can always repeat the previous step to touch up. Now I start to apply some colour to the miniature with our first of 3 applications. Barak-Nar Burgundy by Citadel is the first. I am applying this layer only over the previous Abaddon Black step and making sure I spray in a downwards direction to seamlessly blend the light and dark parts of the miniature. For the second base layer, I'm applying Citadel Screamer Pink with a smaller 0.2 needle airbrush with a lower pressure of 15 psi, so I have more control over its application. Here I want to highlight the previous step by gradually building up the transition from dark to light. For the third and final coloured layer with the airbrush, I apply Citadel Pink Horror. Following the previous step, using lower pressure, I carefully apply a thin highlight layer over the Screamer Pink, applying this step to precise locations to emanate how the light would naturally hit the highest parts of the miniature. Naturally, some overspray can occur during the coloured base layers, and this can dull the effect of the first Max Darth application. So in this optional step, I am just reinforcing this process again before I start to work with the paintbrush. Onto the brushwork. I start with Citadel Barak-Nar Burgundy I'm thinning the mix to a glazed consistency to help keep the paint transparent. I am looking to retain a smooth transition from the black and coloured base layers applied with the airbrush. I am only adding the burgundy to the lower sections of the cloak and dragging my brush in a downward direction to create small transitional lines. Moving up in the triad colours, I am again using Screamer Pink by Citadel to add small highlights to the raised areas of the spirit's robes and highlighting any of the tears that sit on top of the chainmail underlayer. Here I am stippling and in a downward motion creating small highlight lines across the top of the back and face of the spirit. At this point, the spirits are starting to look more ethereal. I will now push this further with lighter values added to the colours. Repeating the previous step, I now use Citadel Pink Horror to push the highlights up. Carefully applying this step using small brush strokes to avoid overpainting the previous layer is key to creating the glowing effect. Working my way around the miniatures, I make sure I am focusing on all the raised areas and keeping this step inside the previous Screamer Pink layer at all times. You can leave the layering at this point, but I like to push it slightly further by adding an equal 50 by 50 mix of Citadel Pink Horror and Pallid Witch Flesh to give the final touch to this process. Once again, making sure to only work inside the previous layer and keeping the paint to a thin glaze-like consistency, I am carefully applying very thin line highlights and pin dot applications to the raised sections. Moving down to the black sections of the robes, I take a small dry brush to gently apply some edge highlights. I am using Citadel Corvus Black, followed by Dawnstone on the tips of the robes. You could use a small edge highlight brush here if you prefer, but I like the smooth blended finish a dry brush creates. These two colours really stand out against the flat matte finish of the Max Darth layer. Taking Citadel Garagak Sewer contrast paint, I cover all the cheesecloth parts I have additionally added to the backs of the spirits. Contrast paint is an ideal medium for the cloth as it seeps into all the recesses the textile naturally has. You can use any transparent paint for this area, but just ensure it is a dark colour as we will be adding some lighter dry brushing layers over the top of this step. Over the cheesecloth robes, I now add a light dry brush of Citadel Steel Legion Drab, followed with a lighter coat of Bane Blade Brown. With minimal metallic parts to these miniatures, this is a quick step. I am adding Citadel Leadbelcher to the chains, Spirit Sword and chainmail. Now I'm going to pick out all of the skulls. This includes some of the spirits' faces and the skulls I have placed around the base. I like to use 3 colours from Citadel for my bone work. I start with a base layer of Xandri dust, followed by Morghast bone, and then finally highlighted with Screaming Skull. Here I am just building up the highlighted layers on all the skulls to give them a crisp, bright finish, as these will later be toned down heavily with the use of enamels. I now give the tombstones a double coat of Citadel Dawnstone. Once the Dawnstone layers have dried, I take a small piece of sponge and stipple an equal mixture of Citadel Dawnstone and Pallid Witch Flesh across all the surfaces of the stone, paying particular attention to any sharp corners or broken off pieces of the tombs. Now for the enamel layers, which is my favourite part of the process. I am adding a liberal application of Villainy Inks Goon's Grime across the tombstones, skulls, cheesecloth and metallics. I personally prefer to thin my enamels with 50% spirits and apply a couple of layers. This gives me more control with its application and I can guide where it pulls, ultimately requiring less reductive work once the enamels have dried. Between each layer, I am using a hairdryer on a medium heat to speed up the drying process, allowing me to move quickly from layer to layer. These enamels have a long working time. Next, I apply Villainy Inks Dystopian Brown to all the bone parts of the miniature to add depth and to darken down the acrylic layers. I am also applying Dystopian Brown to the tombstones. Once again, I use a hairdryer in between layers to speed up the process, and as each layer dries, I apply more enamels on top until I reach the desired level of dirt and filth that would be on ancient bones and tombstones. Onto the metals, and time to make them look worn, rusted and ancient. I'm firstly using Villainy Inks Sector Rust, thinned with only a small amount of mineral spirits. I'm guiding the enamels into the kinks of the chains and allowing it to pull where most of the rusted texture would naturally appear. I am adding the rust to the rivets across the spirit's hood, letting the enamel pool around the rivet, leaving the metallic acrylic layer in place. Not forgetting the spirit's rusted blade, I allow the enamel to sit in the pits and chips across the sword, manipulating it across the blade with my brush. Reviewing the mini, I decide a further pass of Villainy Inks Goon's Grime is needed for the filth-infested robes, giving the robes a dirtier, more saturated finish. I now add Villainy Ink's Decay of Death to the cheesecloth layers and any bonework across the miniature. This paint doesn't show up whilst wet, so it's advisable to do several smaller passes using a hairdryer in between layers to check you haven't over-applied this step. The finish is a chalky muted green, which is amazing for aging textiles, woods and other natural elements. Here I am taking a Q-tip loaded with a small amount of spirits to gently go over some of the heavily saturated areas and move the enamels into the recesses. You only need a very light touch when passing over the miniature, making sure not to damage any of the previous steps. Now I move back to the rust, but this time I am using Dirty Down Rust. This is an acrylic product, so you need to make sure the enamel layers are fully dried before applying this step. Dirty Down Rust combined with Villainy Ink's Sector Rust creates a very realistic finish. Carefully applying the product over all the metallic layers. I am only applying small amounts, and you can thin this rust with a little water to help it flow off your brush. I am applying Dirty Down moss to the tombstones and to the lower sections of the skulls that sit against the tombs where the moss would naturally grow. Focusing on the recesses and cracks on the tombstones and towards the base helps create a realistic, aged moss finish on the stone textures. I like to add some edge highlights to all the metal once the previous layers have dried, so here I am just passing over all the raised edges along the metalwork with Citadel Stormhost Silver to give the appearance of knocks, sharp edges and light catching the top of the metallics. For the base, I start with an application of AK's Interactive Volcanic Earth. This product has a dark ashy grey with a slight purple undertone, which I feel complements the burgundy to pink colours of the spirits. Being careful not to apply any of this finish too close to the miniatures, I just gradually push the textured paint into place and swap to a smaller brush for intricate areas. Once the texture paint has fully dried, I start to dry brush and stipple 3 colours over the texture. The first colour I am applying is Citadel Skaven Blight Dinge. The second dry brush pass is Citadel Dawnstone, applied lightly over the previous layer. The final dry brush pass is Terminator Stone from Citadel. I am being gentle and selective with this application, making sure I only hit the bumps and rough edges of the texture paint. To tie the elements of the mini that touch the base together, I apply a quick application of Dirty Down moss to emanate the moss spreading from the ground and growing up the tombs. Having already applied some dead grass to the base, I now add some small brown lichen pieces and bracken to the base. I focus around the tombstones where the weeds and plants would grow. I have added a small amount of sepia-toned acrylic paint to the dead grass just to tone this down. I finally add Villainy Inks Decay of Death to select parts of the base, helping to tie the scheme together. Once dry, I paint the rim of the base black, and I call the miniature complete. This technique can be applied across various miniatures in your army. Here are just a couple of alternative miniatures I have completed using the same technique. This zombie giant has a screaming skull flail, which transitions from a smoky black through to the brighter skulls. This miniature, aptly named the Arcanum, has two spirits bursting from the Necrotic library, and this black coach uses the technique across the horses, rider and wheels. I would like to take a moment to thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial and will join me in this journey as I produce future content for the channel. For now, I bid you farewell.